Okay, in this section, we're going to take a look at life in 1960s America and a look at domestic policies. In this picture here, you can see a family that is looking at a television screen. I wonder if you know what president that is on the television screen. You should know that that is John F. Kennedy. So we'll start by talking about JFK. We talked about a lot of his policies in our previous discussion. So to start today's discussion, unfortunately, is the JFK assassination. John F. Kennedy was assassinated in downtown Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, by Lee Harvey Oswald, who you see in the picture on the right. If you've had a chance to go to Dealey Plaza in downtown Dallas, I highly recommend you going there and checking that out, as well as going to the Sixth Floor Museum. So after JFK's assassination, his vice president, which is Lyndon B. Johnson, immediately becomes president. So that is how the line of succession works in US politics. If the president is unable to serve in their position, the vice president will then fulfill that role. So Kennedy's vice president is Lyndon B. Johnson. He then becomes president at that time. Lyndon B. Johnson, we've talked a little bit about him through civil rights. He's definitely a very cool president. If you have not been to his presidential library in Austin at the UT campus, I highly recommend it. It is an excellent museum as well, but y'all know how much I love museums. So Lyndon B. Johnson is scheduled to fulfill the rest of JFK's presidency, but in order to keep his presidency after 1964, he's going to have to run again for president. So in the 1964 election, Lyndon B. Johnson, who is the Democrat, because JFK was a Democrat, runs against Barry Goldwater, who is a Republican. So 1964 election, Democrat Lyndon B. Johnson versus Republican Barry Goldwater. Here's some things you need to know about Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater was the Republican nominee for president against Democrat Lyndon B. Johnson in the 1964 election. He called for a tough stance on dealing with the Soviets. So remember, we are still dealing with the Cold War at this time period. The Cold War is going all the way until 1991. So this is Barry Goldwater's strategy in dealing with that. And he also wanted to limit the reach of the government into the lives of citizens. So that's kind of the difference between Republican and Democrat, a conservative versus liberal, is that Barry Goldwater is going to try to limit the reach of government into the lives of citizens. He's also going to revive, which means to bring to life, conservative, which is traditional political thought, and is going to question the unlimited expansion of federal power. Those are the things you need to know about Barry Goldwater and how and his political stances. Here are the election results of that 1964 election. Remember, we have the Electoral College, which means each state is essentially worth a different amount of points, and you have to get 270 points in order to win the election. What you see in blue is the Democrat states, which is Johnson. What you see in red is the Republican states, which is Goldwater. You notice that Goldwater, who's a Republican, wins mostly the Deep South here, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama and Georgia and South Carolina. And then you see that Lyndon B. Johnson wins the rest of the country. Johnson wins the popular vote as well with over 43 million, when Goldwater only gets 27 million of the popular vote. So this shows that who was our president in the 1964 election? Lyndon B. Johnson. So Lyndon B. Johnson is the president after JFK's assassination, and it then wins the 1964 election. So Democrat LBJ remains president in 1964, and here's the reason why. Many people feared that Goldwater was an extremist who might lead the nation into a nuclear war against the Soviet Union. Remember, Goldwater said that he had a tough stance on dealing with the Soviets, and people were worried that it was going to be too tough and that the Cold War might turn hot. Remember, the Cold War is still a major concern with most Americans at this time period. So Lyndon B. Johnson is our president now, and we will talk about his domestic policies in our next section.